Welcome back to the deep dive. You know the drill. You bring us the sources, the ideas, the stuff you're grappling with.
And we dig in, try to pull out the key insights for you.
Exactly. So today we're tackling something many of us find challenging: writing. And specifically, we're looking at a teaching strategy called semantic mapping.
Right, the source is this research paper, The Effectiveness of Semantic Mapping Strategy to Improve Students' Writing Skill on Recount Text in Language Dormitory. Quite a title.
It is, but it gets right to the point.
And it tackles a really common issue. I mean, the researchers themselves noted how tough writing can be. Kids get stuck, right?
Yeah, they mention things like just not having ideas or being confused about what to even write.
Or picking the wrong words, repeating stuff, not being able to string ideas together smoothly.
Plus all the grammar, spelling, punctuation headaches. Yeah,
So finding strategies that actually help is, well, it's kind of a big deal.
definitely. So our mission today, what is the semantic mapping thing? Why might it work for those writing problems? How did this specific study check if it works? And, what did they find, especially for writing recount texts, those personal stories?
Got it. Let's start with the strategy itself, semantic mapping. The paper calls it a strategy involving clustering words.
Clustering. Okay, like grouping things visually.
Exactly. You kick things off with a main idea,
Yeah.
right? The theme of your writing,
The core topic.
a core topic. And then you just branch out from there. You add words, concepts, ideas that relate to it.
Okay, so it's a bit like brainstorming, maybe, but structured. Like you can see the connections.
That's a really good way to think about it. It is a type of graphic organizer, basically a visual map for your thoughts.
Right.
Helps you see how different pieces connect before you start trying to write full sentences. Explore the territory, so to speak.
Okay, I can see how that might help if you're staring at a blank page feeling stuck. Seeing those links visually could, unlock something.
Mhm.
But, does it actually translate to better writing? How did they test it in this study?
Good question. They wanted to see if using the strategy actually caused writing skills to improve. So they set up a comparison.
Okay.
They worked with elementary students in what they call a language dormitory. Two groups.
Two groups. So one used semantic mapping and the other didn't?
You got it. An experimental group they learned and used semantic mapping, and a control group who stuck with the usual teaching methods.
How many students?
15 in each group, so 30 total.
Okay, and it sounds like they used existing groups, right? Not like randomly assigned kids.
Yeah, the paper mentions a quasi-experimental design, not equivalent groups. So yes, likely existing classes or groups they work with.
Right, makes sense in a school setting. So how did they measure the effect, the writing skill?
So the main thing was comparing writing samples. Students wrote these recount texts, personal stories, before the study really started. That's the pretest.
Okay, a baseline.
Exactly. Then the experimental group got the semantic mapping instruction and practice. The control group didn't. Then both groups wrote another recount text, the post-test.
And they scored these texts?
Yes, they scored them based on writing quality. They also looked at documentation, like lesson plans and examples, but the pre- and post-test scores were key.
Gotcha. So what did the scores show? Did the mapping make a difference?
Well, first, the pretest scores. They were actually really close. The control group averaged about 47, the experimental group 48.
Okay, so both groups started out pretty much at the same level. That's good, makes the comparison fair.
Definitely. But then came the post-test results.
Yeah.
Big difference. The control group's average score, it barely moved. Went from 47 to 48, like almost no change.
Okay.
But the experimental group, the ones using semantic mapping, their average score jumped from 48 all the way up to 86.
Whoa, 48 to 86.
Yeah.
That's huge. A nearly 40-point jump on average.
It really is a striking difference. A 38-point average difference between the groups on the post-test.
Wow. Okay, but was that difference, statistically real? Or could it have just been a fluke, some random chance?
Right, that's always the question with research. They ran statistical tests, specifically a t-test, to check that.
And the verdict.
The t-test showed the difference was statistically significant.
Okay, break that down. What does statistically significant mean here, practically?
It essentially means it's highly unlikely that the big score difference they saw happened just by random luck. The probability of it being chance was very low. Specifically, the significance value was 0.045, which is less than the standard cutoff of 0.05.
Ah, okay. So the math backs up the idea that the semantic mapping strategy itself likely caused that big improvement.
That's the interpretation, yes.
Yeah.
The statistics support rejecting the idea that there was enough difference. Therefore, the difference is considered significant, pointing to the effectiveness of the strategy.
So the main conclusion from this specific study seems pretty clear then.
Yeah, the paper wraps up by stating that for these students writing these kinds of texts, semantic mapping was an effective strategy for improving their writing skills.
And that ties right back to those initial problems, doesn't it? Like kids not knowing what to write or how to structure their ideas.
It really seems to. This visual mapping process looks like it helped them generate and organize thoughts before writing. It gave them a framework.
Addresses that blank page fear, maybe?
Could be.
Yeah.
It facilitates that planning stage, makes it easier to get started and connect the dots.
Did the paper suggest if this could work for other things, like older students or different types of writing?
They did briefly mention some other research, Wuli Zhang and others, I think finding semantic mapping helpful for writing report texts, too. So while this study was specific, there's a hint it might have broader uses.
Interesting. Okay, let's bring this back to you listening in. How could this apply to your world?
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Anytime you feel stuck starting something in email,
Right.
that report, maybe even planning a presentation.
Or just trying to organize your thoughts for a difficult conversation.
Exactly. Could taking 5 minutes to just, map it out visually. Core idea in the middle, related points branching off. Could that help you?
Help you find clarity, maybe generate more ideas, or just see the structure better.
It feels like the core idea here isn't just about teaching kids, right? It's about using visual organization as a thinking tool.
Yeah, making abstract thoughts a bit more concrete, more manageable.
Precisely. Making the connections visible.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, we looked at semantic mapping, this visual strategy for clustering ideas.
And we saw how this particular study tested it with elementary students writing personal recount texts.
The results were pretty dramatic.
Yeah.
A big, statistically significant jump in writing scores for the kids who used semantic mapping compared to the control group.
Suggesting it really helped them, likely by making it easier to brainstorm and organize their ideas before writing, tackling those common writing hurdles.
Right. So here's a final thought for you to chew on. This study focused on young students writing stories. But think bigger. Could adapting this mapping approach, visually laying out ideas and their connections, be a powerful technique not just for kids, but for anyone, for you? When you're trying to understand something complex, brainstorm a project, or just make sense of a flood of information, maybe even process what you heard here today.